Millionaire black man refused to give up his autistic son for adoption after his wife decided to walk away. Michael Green stood at the large picture window of his home office, staring out at the city skyline that had once filled him with pride and accomplishment. As the CEO of a successful investment firm, he had spent years building a life of luxury and influence. Yet, none of it seemed to matter in this moment, as the harsh reality of his personal life threatened to unravel everything he had worked so hard to achieve. Behind him, his wife, Julia, walked around the office, her voice growing more strained with every word she spoke. "Michael, I can't do this anymore," she said, her hands gesturing in frustration. I've tried for years, but I just can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I'm exhausted. I'm overwhelmed. Her voice broke, and she turned away from him, wiping at her eyes. Michael closed his eyes, his heart heavy. He knew where this conversation was heading. It wasn't the first time Julia had brought up her struggles, but this time felt different. Her tone showed how serious she was. "Julia," he began, his voice low and calm. "I know it's been hard. I know raising Eli hasn't been easy. But we're in this together. We've always been in this together." Julia spun around to face him, her expression hardening. "Are we?" "Because it doesn't feel like it, Michael. You're at the office all day, managing the company, attending meetings, and flying across the country for business. And I'm the one left at home, dealing with Eli's meltdowns, his therapies, his special needs. I'm the one who has to explain to people why our son can't speak properly, why he has these outbursts in public, why he can't be normal like other kids. I'm the one who feels like I'm drowning." Michael's chest tightened. He had heard the exhaustion in Julia's voice before, but there was something deeper now, something desperate. He walked toward her, trying to close the emotional distance that had been growing between them for years. "I know it's been hard on you, Julia. I do. But we knew when Eli was diagnosed with autism that this wouldn't be easy. He needs us." Julia shook her head, her voice breaking again. "I don't know if I can be what he needs anymore, Michael. I've lost myself in all of this. I love Eli, but I can't do it alone. And you're so busy with your career that I feel like I'm fighting this battle by myself." Michael reached for her, but she stepped back, the pain in her eyes cutting through him. "I'm trying to make it work for all of us," he said, his voice softening. "I'm doing everything I can to provide for our family, to make sure Eli has the best care, the best opportunities, but I can't do it without you." Julia let out a bitter laugh, her tears spilling over. "Without me? Michael, you're already without me. You don't see what happens every day. You don't see the sleepless nights when Eli won't stop crying, the appointments, the therapy sessions that leave me drained. You don't see what it's doing to me, and I can't." She paused, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't do this anymore." Michael felt the words like a physical blow. He had always known that raising Eli was difficult, but he hadn't fully grasped the toll it had taken on Julia. He had been too focused on his work, too determined to provide for their family financially, to notice the cracks forming in their marriage. And now, those cracks had turned into deep, irreparable fractures. "I'm leaving, Michael," Julia said, her voice steady now. "I need to get away. I need to find myself again. And I think Eli would be better off if he were with a family who could take care of him the way he deserves. People who have the experience and the patience to handle his needs." Michael's heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we should give Eli up for adoption," she said, the words heavy with finality. "There are families out there who specialize in raising children with special needs. They'll know how to help him in ways that we can't. It's what's best for him." Michael's vision blurred as the weight of her words crashed over him. Give Eli up for adoption. His son, the boy he had loved from the moment he held him in his arms? The idea was unfathomable, and yet here Julia was, suggesting it as if it were a solution to their problems. "No," Michael said firmly, shaking his head. "I'm not giving up my son." Julia's face fell, her expression a mixture of disappointment and sorrow. "Michael, you don't understand. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving whether you agree with me or not, but I need you to understand that Eli would be better off without his parents." Michael interrupted, his voice rising with anger. "How could you even suggest that? He's our son, Julia, our son, and he needs us. He needs you." "He needs more than I can give," Julia whispered, her tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry, Michael. I've made up my mind." Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. He had built his life on solid foundations: his business, his family, his marriage, and now everything was crumbling around him. Julia wasn't asking for his permission. She was telling him that she was leaving. And she expected him to give up the one thing that mattered most: his son. "No," Michael repeated, his voice firm. "If you want to leave, I can't stop you. But I'm not giving up Eli. He's my son, and I'm going to raise him." Julia's sobs grew louder, but Michael's resolve didn't waver. His mind was made up. He wasn't going to abandon Eli, no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. He would find a way to make it work, even if that meant raising Eli on his own. Julia turned and walked toward the door, her shoulders shaking with every step. She paused briefly, as if waiting for Michael to say something that might change her mind. But as he remained silent, she opened the door and left. Michael stood in the middle of the room, the weight of her departure settling over him. He was alone now, a single father to a son with special needs, facing an uncertain future. But he knew one thing for certain: he would never give up on Eli, no matter what. Michael Green had always prided himself on his ability to navigate complex situations, whether it was managing multi-million-dollar business deals or finding solutions to high-stakes financial problems. But nothing could have prepared him for the challenge of raising his autistic son, Eli, alone. In the days following Julia's departure, the house felt quiet. The echoes of her final words still hung in the air, and Michael found it difficult to shake the weight of her decision. She had left him to face their reality alone, a reality that felt overwhelming and unfamiliar. Despite his wealth, his connections, and the resources available to him, Michael couldn't escape the fear that he wasn't equipped for this role. He wasn't just a single father. He was a father to a child with special needs, and that required more than just love. It required patience, understanding, and a willingness to learn everything he could about Eli's world. Eli was 5 years old and had been diagnosed with autism 2 years back. The diagnosis had hit both him and Julia hard, but while Julia had struggled to cope with the daily challenges, Michael had tried to be optimistic. Eli was prone to sensory overloads and had difficulty communicating his emotions, but Michael believed that with the right support, Eli could thrive. He just needed to find a way to connect with his son, a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. One of the first hurdles Michael faced was understanding Eli's daily routines and sensory sensitivities. Julia had been the one primarily involved in Eli's therapies, from speech therapy to occupational therapy, while Michael had been more focused on work. Now, with Julia gone, Michael had to take on the role of both father and caregiver. The therapists and specialists who had worked with Eli over the years provided guidance, but Michael quickly realized that no amount of professional advice could fully prepare him for the day-to-day realities of parenting a child like Eli. Mornings were the hardest. Eli thrived on routine, and any disruption to that routine could lead to a meltdown. Michael learned this the hard way one morning when, in his rush to get to a meeting, he forgot to prepare Eli's breakfast exactly the way he liked it, cut into perfect squares, no crusts, and served on the blue plate. When Michael placed the wrong plate in front of Eli, his son's face crumpled, and within seconds, he was in full meltdown mode. Tears streamed down Eli's face as he pushed the plate away, his body rocking back and forth in distress. Michael froze, unsure of what to do. His first instinct was to fix the situation, to make things right, but he quickly realized that his usual problem-solving approach wasn't going to work here. Eli wasn't upset because of something Michael could easily fix. He was overwhelmed, and no amount of reasoning or explaining could calm him down. Michael knelt beside Eli, feeling helpless as his son continued to sob uncontrollably. After what felt like an eternity, Eli's tears began to slow, and he crawled into Michael's arms exhausted. As Michael held his son, he realized that this was the first of many moments where he would need to be patient and present, even when he didn't have all the answers. In the weeks that followed, Michael began to dive himself in learning everything he could about autism. He attended seminars, read books, and sought advice from parents in online support groups who were raising autistic children. These parents, many of whom were facing similar struggles, became a lifeline for Michael. They shared their stories, their frustrations, and their small victories. And for the first time since Julia left, Michael didn't feel so alone. Through these resources, Michael learned to understand Eli's triggers and how to create an environment where his son felt safe. He adjusted the house to accommodate Eli's sensory needs, setting up a quiet space with soft lighting and sensory toys to help Eli decompress after a long day. He also started using visual schedules, simple picture boards that helped Eli understand what was coming next and made transitions easier for him. With time, Michael began to see small improvements in Eli's behavior. The meltdowns became less frequent, and while Eli still didn't speak, he started communicating in his own way, through gestures, eye contact, and the occasional smile. Despite these improvements, Michael faced constant doubt. Raising Eli alone was emotionally and physically exhausting, and there were moments when he questioned whether he was doing enough. Some days, he felt like he was failing Eli, unable to give him what he truly needed. But on other days, when Eli curled up next to him on the couch, resting his head on Michael's shoulder, those doubts seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Michael's business too began to shift in response to his new role. Once the centerpiece of his life, the company now took a back seat to Eli's needs. Michael scaled back his involvement in day-to-day operations, delegating more responsibilities to his management team. At first, this decision felt like a loss, a step away from the empire he had built. But as the weeks passed, Michael realized that stepping back from work allowed him to be present in Eli's life in ways he never could have imagined before. Through it all, one thing became clear to Michael. He would never regret his decision to keep Eli. While it was far from easy, there was a deep, unspoken bond between them that only grew stronger with time. Eli wasn't just his son, he was his entire world, and no amount of success or wealth could compare to the love he felt for him. However, Michael's journey as a single father was far from over. Just as he began to settle into this new chapter of his life, he would soon find himself facing challenges he hadn't anticipated. Challenges that would test his resilience, his patience, and his ability to protect the one thing that mattered most: his son. As time passed, Michael Green began to find his rhythm in raising Eli. The once overwhelming task of caring for his autistic son had become a new normal, one filled with small victories, learning moments, and an evolving sense of purpose. But as Michael settled into his role as a single father, something unexpected began to happen. He realized that his experience, though difficult, had given him a new perspective on the world. His eyes were opened to the struggles of other parents in similar situations, and he began to see just how much needed to change, not just for Eli, but for all children with autism. Michael had always been a driven man, the type to take on challenges head first. It was how he built his business empire, and now he found himself with a new mission: to use his influence and resources to advocate for autism, awareness and support. Raising Eli had taught him that many families lacked the financial means to access proper care and therapies for their children, and even when resources were available, society's understanding of autism was still lacking. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the stigma, the misunderstandings, and the lack of support for parents trying to navigate a world that often didn't know how to accommodate children like Eli. One day, as Michael was driving Eli to his speech therapy session, he passed a billboard advertising a charity gala for children's health. The image of smiling children and their families caught his eye, and an idea began to form in his mind. Michael had attended countless charity events over the years: galas, fundraisers, networking events where millionaires and celebrities donated money to noble causes. But rarely had he seen events that specifically addressed the needs of children with autism and their families. That evening, after putting Eli to bed, Michael sat at his desk and began sketching out plans for an Autism Awareness Foundation. He wanted to create something meaningful, something that went beyond raising money and truly made a difference. The foundation would focus on 3 key areas: funding for early intervention therapies, providing educational resources for parents and caregivers, and working to change public perceptions of autism through media and advocacy campaigns. The next morning, Michael contacted his team of advisors, instructing them to begin the legal groundwork for establishing the foundation. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Starting any kind of non-profit organization required time, commitment, and a clear vision. But Michael was determined. If he could build a successful business from the ground up, he could certainly build a foundation that could change lives. Word spread quickly about Michael's new endeavor, and soon, the media took notice. Reporters, intrigued by the millionaire businessman's decision to focus on autism advocacy, reached out for interviews. Michael, who had never been one for public speaking, initially hesitated. His business success had always been driven by his work behind the scenes, letting the results speak for themselves. But this was different. This was personal. Eventually, Michael agreed to an interview with a well-known news outlet, hoping to use the platform to shed light on the realities of raising a child with autism. The interview took place in his home, with Eli quietly playing in the background as cameras and lights were set up in the living room. Michael felt a mixture of nerves and determination as the reporter sat across from him, ready to begin. "You've accomplished so much in your career, Mr. Green," the reporter began. "Why make this shift now toward autism advocacy?" Michael took a deep breath before answering. "Because I realized how important it is to use my voice for something that matters. Raising my son, Eli, has been the most challenging and rewarding experience of my life. And through that, I've seen firsthand how many families struggle to get the support they need. Autism is widely misunderstood, and I want to help change that." The interview continued with Michael sharing personal stories about Eli, his meltdowns, his progress in therapy, and the special bond they had formed. As he spoke, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This wasn't just about promoting his foundation. It was about opening up, about being vulnerable in a way he hadn't been before. He knew that if people could see the love and challenges behind his journey, they might start to understand the complexities of raising a child with special needs. The interview aired a week later, and the response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from parents, teachers, and caregivers, all thanking Michael for his honesty and his willingness to speak about autism in such a public way. Many of them shared their own stories. Stories of struggles similar to his, stories of triumphs, and stories of heartbreak. Michael was moved by how many people felt alone in their journeys, and he realized that his foundation could be a beacon of hope for these families. As the foundation officially launched, Michael hosted his first autism awareness event, a gala that combined fundraising with education. He invited top experts in the field of autism research and therapy, ensuring that the event wasn't just a glamorous affair, but also a space for meaningful conversations and learning. Parents, educators, and advocates gathered to share their experiences and discuss ways to improve resources for children with autism. During his speech at the gala, Michael looked out at the crowd, feeling a deep sense of pride. "This foundation is for families like mine," he said, his voice steady. "For parents who love their children fiercely and want to give them the best future possible. It's for children like my son, Eli, who deserve a world that understands them, supports them, and sees their potential." The audience erupted in applause, and Michael felt a swell of emotion. This was what he had been working toward, not just for Eli, but for every child who faced the challenges of autism. His foundation was only the beginning, but it was a step toward creating a world where children like Eli could thrive, where parents wouldn't have to feel isolated, and where understanding replaced fear. As the night drew to a close, Michael returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. He checked on Eli, who was peacefully asleep in his bed, and sat down beside him. "We're going to change the world, buddy," Michael whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Eli's forehead, "one step at a time." The road ahead would still be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Michael felt hopeful. He had found his voice, and with it, he was determined to make sure that every child with autism, like Eli, had the opportunity to be heard, understood, and loved. It had been nearly 2 years since Julia left, and during that time, Michael had learned more about himself, his son, and the strength it took to build a life around love, patience, and understanding. His days were now a delicate balance between running his autism foundation, managing his business, and being a present father to Eli. The house, once a place filled with tension and uncertainty, had become a safe haven for Eli, a home designed around his needs and filled with peace. Michael had found a rhythm, one that revolved around Eli's daily routines, therapies, and the occasional breakthrough moments that filled him with pride. He had never imagined himself raising a child alone, but now he couldn't picture life any other way. Eli's progress, though slow and sometimes difficult, had brought them closer than ever. Eli might not have been able to speak, but the bond they shared didn't need words. But just as Michael had settled into this new chapter of his life, a familiar face unexpectedly returned. One Friday evening, as Michael was preparing dinner, he heard a knock at the front door. He wasn't expecting anyone, and Eli was in his sensory room, enjoying some quiet time. Wiping his hands on a towel, Michael walked to the door and opened it. His heart nearly stopped when he saw who was standing there. Julia. She looked different, tired, a little thinner, and her usually polished appearance was more understated. She stood there for a moment, her eyes scanning his face as if searching for some kind of unspoken permission to be there. "Michael," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Michael didn't say anything at first. He wasn't sure how to respond to seeing her after all this time. The last time they had stood in this house together, she had been walking out of their lives, leaving him to raise Eli on his own. And now here she was, standing on his doorstep, as if the past 2 years hadn't happened. "What are you doing here, Julia?" Michael finally asked, his tone neutral but guarded. She shifted nervously, glancing down at her hands before looking up at him again. I've been thinking about you. About Eli," she said. "I wanted to see how you're both doing." Michael stepped aside, letting her into the house without a word. She walked into the living room, looking around at the space that had changed so much since she had left. The house was now designed to meet Eli's needs: soft lighting, calming colors, and sensory-friendly toys scattered throughout. It was clear that Michael had made this a home for Eli, a home where he could thrive. "I see you've made some changes," Julia remarked, her voice quiet. Michael nodded, leaning against the wall as he watched her. "Yeah, a lot has changed. Eli's doing better. He still has his challenges, but we've made progress." Julia's eyes filled with emotion, and she swallowed hard before speaking again. "I made a mistake, Michael. A huge mistake. I shouldn't have left. I wasn't strong enough to handle things back then. But I've had time to think, and I want to be a part of his life again. I want to help." Michael felt a wave of emotions wash over him: anger, confusion, even a flicker of hope. He had been through so much since she left. He had learned how to be Eli's father, how to understand his son in ways that Julia had never been able to. Part of him had moved on from the idea of her ever coming back, but now, here she was, asking for a second chance. "Do you really think it's that simple?" Michael asked, his voice filled with frustration. "You walked away, Julia. You left us, and I had to figure it out on my own. You can't just come back and expect everything to go back to the way it was." Julia flinched at his words, but she didn't back down. "I know I hurt you, Michael. I know I hurt Eli too, even though he doesn't understand why I left. But I've changed. I've been seeing a therapist, and I've learned how to cope with the things I couldn't handle before. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away. I just want a chance to prove that I'm not the same person who walked out that day." Michael stared at her, his mind racing. He didn't know what to believe. Part of him wanted to protect Eli from the possibility of being hurt again. He had worked so hard to create a stable life for his son, and he wasn't sure if letting Julia back in would jeopardize that. As if on cue, Eli came wandering into the living room, clutching his favorite sensory toy in his hand. His wide eyes landed on Julia, and he stopped in his tracks, staring at her as if trying to remember who she was. Julia's breath tightened, and tears filled up in her eyes as she knelt down, opening her arms to him. "Eli," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's Mommy." For a moment, Eli didn't move. He stood there watching her, his expression unreadable. Michael's heart pounded as he watched the scene unfold, unsure of what Eli would do. But then slowly, Eli walked toward her, his small hand reaching out to touch her face. Julia's tears fell freely as she pulled him into a gentle hug, holding him close as if she had been waiting for this moment forever. Michael's heart softened as he watched the interaction between mother and son. He knew that Eli didn't understand the complexities of what had happened, but at that moment, it didn't matter. Eli was happy to see his mother, and that was enough for now. As Julia stood up, still holding Eli's hand, she looked at Michael, her expression pleading. "Please, Michael," she said softly. "Let me be part of his life again. Let me help you both." Michael didn't answer right away. He had always believed in second chances, but this was different. This was about protecting his son, about making sure that Eli's world remained stable and safe. But as he looked at Julia and Eli together, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was room for forgiveness. "I'm not making any promises," Michael said finally, his voice steady. "But if you're serious about being there for him, for us, then we'll take it one step at a time." Julia nodded, tears still shining in her eyes. "That's all I'm asking." Michael exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. It wasn't going to be easy, and he knew there were still wounds to heal. But for Eli's sake, and maybe for his own, he was willing to try. Together they would figure out what the future held, one step at a time. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing inspiring stories like this one. We have many more powerful stories of resilience, family, and hope waiting for you. Click on the links on your screen to explore more heartwarming tales. Thank you for being part of our community, and we look forward to seeing you in the next story.